Hi, good evening. I'm Elma, and thank you for joining us this evening at the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich, for the screening of 55 Degrees North, 5 Degrees East. It's a spoken word, music and drama performance created and produced by our guest speaker, the lyricist and artist, Gareth Smith. Hey, welcome, Gareth.
Hi, thanks very much for having us.
Oh, pleasure. Your piece is basically a story of loss, trauma, the North, and memory, encompassing industrial music, drone, and folk song, and tells the story of the fateful events of the 21st October 1904. I'd never heard of the Dogger Bank incident, which also became known as the North Sea outrage, until I spoke to you. Can you set the sort of political scene in 1904 and then explain what happened on that night?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, like many stories of the sea and other kind of pieces of significant political history, they do often get lost unless they're kind of constantly spoken about, really. But the 1904, there was a kind of series of expansions that were taking place from Russia and from Japan as well, and that led them directly into conflict, as these things often do, really. What had happened, I think there was parts of, I mean, I'm not a historian, so I can't fill in all the detail, but I think
Sure, sure, just get rough.
some of the background is, yeah, there was invasions, I think, into China from Japan, and which was territory which Russia was interested in. Basically, Russia and Japan were thrust into war with each other. There was a series of battles that took place around Japan, with the Russian Navy being deployed from Vladivostok, and the Russians were absolutely decimated in those battles. So they had to call on the backup from the Baltic Fleet, which was the fleet that was based at St. Petersburg. So they were called up to sail pretty much all the way around the world to Japan to kind of get into to meet the Japanese headlong in the conflict and the continuation of the war.
Mhm.
As they were sailing through the North Sea, they encountered a bunch of trawlers from Hull, fleet of about 30 trawlers or so, and in an act of absolute madness, kind of opened fire on the trawlers from the city, killing 3 men instantly, and killing members of the Russian Navy as well. Actually, it was kind of indiscriminate firing that kind of took place across a kind of moment of panic, and yeah, sunk the kind of one of the trawlers, the trawler called the Crane, which was what my great grandfather was on, and my great grandfather was killed instantly, along with one of the other members of the trawler that it was on, and another man died, several months afterwards, through causes that were attributed to what had experienced on that evening. So yeah, this is the story that I wanted to kind of unpick a bit, really. Explore this, explore it in a kind of creative and impressionistic way. Try to kind of acknowledge, the political and social history of it all, but also found a way to try and communicate a kind of personal story as well, which is kind of my connection to it. There was a lot of diplomatic fallout off the back of this, really. The British Navy were deployed and followed the Russian Navy all the way around into off the shores of Africa. They tried to arrest them at various points. All these things were kind of cat and mouse between like different nations, as we see it every day, don't we? Kind of political posturing from different countries against each other. But it was a very sensitive situation for quite a period of time, until an inquiry took place and a kind of full, frank apology came from the Russian government at the time, and an acknowledgement that it was just a kind of indiscriminate attack. I've not actually said why the attack happened. They believe that Japanese spy ships were in the North Sea, and that these the trawlers. I mean, it's easy to laugh at it, isn't it? Really, but it's they opened fire on these trawlers thinking they were Japanese spy ships, and that was the reason why they did. Really.
Well, I guess as well, it tells you how nervous a lot of these young soldiers, whether they're in the Navy or whatever, were out doing these things that probably was a case of like they were probably frightened and they didn't know what they were up against. And like you said, it was indiscriminate because sea trawlers, fishing trawlers, you think they would look a lot different from Japanese warships or submarines?
Absolutely. So the stories go as some of the kind of stories that came out straight away. Trawlermen were throwing fish in the air, and the naval boats were so close they could actually, visibly see what was going on. So they were like, "Look, we're fishermen here," but that didn't seem to stop the firing. It lasted for about 30 minutes as well. So in a way, it's kind of remarkable that only 3 trawlermen died in the end, really. But yeah, I mean, the story is very, very equally tragic for the Russians, if not massively more so, because all those men sailed around to Japan and they were,
decimated.
80–90% of them were killed. So it's a really, it's just a tragic
Tragedy after
story.
tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, I think we have a couple of slides. We have an image of your great grandfather, who you mentioned there, George Henry Smith. He was the skipper of the trawler Crane, and as you said, he was one of the casualties that night. That's your great grandfather and great grandmother. What was your great grandmother's name?
She was called Edith, I think.
Edith.
Yeah.
And so for you, like, when did you become aware of the incident growing up, like, and how did it affect your family, do you think, and the community at large? Like, was it something you talked about when you were growing up? I know there's a few questions there, but
Yeah. I mean, so to put a kind of timeline in place, my grandfather was 4 at the time.
okay.
So my paternal family is kind of a generation older than my maternal family. So my grandfather was 4 at the time, and then my granddad had 13 children, of which my dad was the youngest.
Wow.
And then my dad had me in my, in his mid-30s. So there's a really kind of extended kind of link to it, really, which means that it's quite a broken link as well. And my dad has, he's sadly been passed away 20 years as well. But the initial kind of, knowledge that I had was from just these kind of stories that my dad had. My dad had this one book, a book called The 5 Tragedies of Hull, which outlined 5 equally awful incidents that took place kind of within the Hull community. And one of them was the Dogger Bank incident. And he told me about it, that, the statue, there's a statue of my great grandfather up in the memorial to the men that died. And that it was just something I kind of knew bits and pieces about. I was obviously very proud to have a statue of a member of my family kind of in the Hessel Road area, which is the fishing area of the city. But there was lots of gaps in the information as well. I didn't really know a great deal about it. I didn't really know, the fallout. I didn't know much about the family and stuff. And because my grandfather had died when I was born, so I had no connection to that really as well. So there was a lot of filling in the gaps and a lot of working out how it affected the kind of community and my own family came from researching it when I decided to explore this project, really. And I found out that my grandfather was put in a seaman's orphanage along with 2 of his brothers. George Henry had 5 children, and three of his sons were put in a kind of seaman's orphanage using some of the compensation that came back to my great grandmother. My great grandmother died only about 5 years later. So it was about 1910, I think she died. And, I've just tried to kind of piece stuff together, really, kind of find out, what makes sense, and try and find things that make sense to me as well as somebody who's exploring it many, many years later. I don't have a connection that's traumatic in the sense. My connection is, it's filled with a history of trauma, but it's more removed than that. If anything, this is my dad's story, and it's certainly my granddad's story. So I feel that I was always trying to explore it through their eyes a little bit, really. In terms of how it affected the community, I mean, there was real outrage at the time after it happened, a big outpouring of grief and anger. Money flooded into the city, kings, queens, other kind of nobility kind of poured money in to support the families that were. There was lots of men injured as well, not just killed. To support the people affected by it, there was fundraising concerts taking place in theatres in the West End.
Wow.
You know, letters of condolence have been sent here, there, and everywhere. And obviously, the government at the time quickly kind of supported an inquiry and requested a full apology from the Russian
So
Admiralty.
I guess like it's more than a tragedy when something like that happens, because it's didn't have to happen, and so there's more reason to be, like I said, people were outraged, and more reason for people to probably have empathy and want to help, because it's such a terrible thing.
Absolutely. I think, you know, death at sea is not something that was uncommon to the people of Hull, but there was a particular aspect to this which was, yeah, completely preventable and, you know, caused kind of outrage that was external, and people made their external feelings known, really, rather than the kind of internally suffering the grief of a member of the family lost at sea, which is the story of Hull. You know, 6,000 men or so have died at sea in Hull.
Wow, that's a lot of people. I mean, I think we have a couple of images, Ho, if you could just show them. There's some from, there's a postcard depicting shell holes in the trawlers arriving back. Is that one the crane, or?
Well, the crane was sunk. So the
That
crane,
was sunk.
the boat that my great grandfather on was sunk. They managed to get his body and the body of the first mate off, who died, and the other survivors all made it off as well. But it went down, and then the other boats just sailed back into the city. I think all of them had some damage to them on some level.
Okay, there's another one as well. I think just one more we have. Yeah, there's another one. You can see the holes right there. I mean, luckily there wasn't even more death. Yeah,
I think it's remarkable there wasn't as well. And again, reading kind of some of the stories that I've read through the research I've done, stories of trawlermen filling holes in the boats with bedding to keep them afloat in order to get back to the city.
Wow.
So, you know, it was a kind of turned into a big rescue job, and everybody kind of got on board to try and make it, you know, ensure that nobody else died, really.
I mean, how far away from Hull was it? Because I know you have the 55 degrees north and 5 degrees east, but so how far away is that actually?
Yeah, so it's quite a considerable way. You're probably nearer to like Denmark, really, north of the Netherlands, really. So it's quite a way away, really. And 55 degrees north, 5 degrees east is the location of the incident, broadly the location of the incident, and probably where you would find what would be left of the crane nowadays if you were to go down there. You know.
How would you describe the relationship with the fishing community have with the sea? Like you said, that many people have died in the community over the years. How was it then, and like how is it now?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be difficult for me to answer that fully as like somebody who's kind of connection to the darker side of it is a bit older. But you know, I think growing up as a child, you know, my grief related to the fishing industry it's a distant thing. Growing up as a child, you just get a sense of a kind of injustice that's happened to the city, really. But you know, it's a very proud place, and it's you know, it's constantly kind of managed to move forward, you know, even though all these kind of tragedies. I mean, some of them are very recent. I'm sure some of the people who are here tonight will know things about the triple trawler tragedy, and which happened in this time of the year, 1968. 3 trawlers went down, and like, you know, 50 men or something were lost at that time. So, you know, significant numbers of men were dying at sea until very recently, really. You know, almost until, you know, people might know of the headscarf revolutionaries, Lil Bolocka, you know, and the wives of a lot of those trawler men kind of really kicked up a stink and said, we're not having this anymore. We're not having all these men dying at sea. And she was a real instigator, and the people around her in kind of getting better conditions. But, you know, there's something about just sailing out to sea and you know, you're kind of in the lap of the gods to some extent, aren't you, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I can't think of any other industry which is like that, really. I suppose mining maybe on some level in terms of the numbers, but you know, it's crazy the kind of figures that you're thinking of. And I think 6,000 is possibly the slightly conservative element as well, really. So, you know, you're dealing with a lot of historical, you know, kind of trauma that people are kind of working through. But in the last few years, you know, there's been a lot of kind of heritage groups that have really started to show their work and really make visible the story of this industry. And I think that's helped people to kind of talk about it more, really, and particularly to help the younger generations know about it as well, really. I mean, when I was born, the industry had kind of died almost. So, you know, my birth, you know, it kind of coincides with it kind of stopping. So it's really important to find that kind of, you know, that attachment to that history. But you know, I think these groups, the St Andrews Dock Heritage Group, the Bullnose Group that are putting the murals up, I think they're very good at engaging the history without, you know, but being forward looking with it as well. And that takes a lot of sensitivity and a lot of commitment and understanding to the situation.
For sure, and they sounds really good, because it is important to collect those oral histories and like you said, be forward looking with them as well, and how you present things and how you present the stories, the histories. I guess as well, when the Fisherman's Memorial was unveiled in Hull to commemorate the deaths of the 3 British sailors, that must have been quite a proud moment, or that is there now as well, for your family and for the community.
Absolutely, yeah. I think these statues, murals, you know, public works of art, all these things that they act as focal points for communication, really. Focal points for, you know, bereavement and worship, but also for communication. You know, it's a place where people can, you know, it prompts people to think about what's going on around them, what's the history of the streets that are around them and the walls that are around them and the industry that existed around them. And, you know, a statue is a real signifier for that, isn't it? And we've got some great ones and we've got some bad ones, but they all tell a story and they do provoke a conversation. And, you know, a statue is very good at kind of doing that, whether you agree with the reasons behind it or not, really. The location of it's really significant. It's on the corner of Hessel Road and the Boulevard in Hull, which is the heart of the old fishing community. So it's right at the centre. And around it, there are now more kind of up-to-date recent memorials to some of those 6,000 men that I mentioned, really. So yeah, it's really important, that stuff. Because I never got taught any of this stuff in school, really. I was never, you know.
No, it's more kings and queens and things, right?
Of course it is, like, yeah, and we know why that is, because they don't want this story getting out there that, you know, class exploitation takes place in all of us, and, you know, we can understand why that happens. But yeah, these heritage groups are doing an amazing piece of work in finding ways to communicate these stories.
And what you're doing yourself, you know, it's a different type of medium, but you're also, it comes back to the story and what happened. So it's great that there's like different things and for different people to pick up on. So getting on to that, like, how did you conceive of 55 degrees north, 5 degrees east? What was the initial catalyst? What did you want to explore or express, basically?
Okay, so Hull 2017 was announced. Hull has got the bid to be the City of Culture 2017. So I felt, you know, fairly committed to the idea that I would be able to get involved in some capacity. And, you know, I thought telling a story about the Dogger Bank incident, about my great-grandfather's history, was something that, you know, people would be interested in, people in the city would be interested in, because it was a significant piece of history and one that has been forgotten a bit for all the reasons I've outlined. You know, there was a a world war took place 10 years after it happened. So it kind of, it disappeared in layers of importance kind of fairly quickly. So I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of re-explore that story. I applied for some funding from the Hull 2017 team, which I didn't get, but I also applied for some funding from the Arts Council, and I did get that. And the application that I'd made was to explore this story, but to do so using kind of impressionistic engagements with it. So looking at bringing in dance, that's the main feature of this piece. How we put it together was a movement piece, and bringing in electronic music and spoken word to try and create this kind of impressionistic walkthrough of what this story was, but to do so in a way that I didn't want it to be a dry kind of a dry conversation. I wanted it to be more something that was something that was open to people's sensitivity and their own engagement with it, really. So yeah, I started to kind of put ideas together. I started to think about what I would work with. I'd worked with a dancer called Gwen. I'd worked with her previously. I'm not from a dance background.
Okay.
I was an engineer, actually. I'm from a traditional trades background, but I'd got into the creative world slightly later. I started working with a dancer called Gwen, and we'd started to explore kind of movement and stuff. And I started to write and do some research, looking into the history, building a kind of template of what might be included and what won't be included, and then slowly pick through that. And then with Gwen, we started to look at the kind of key themes that were through it. And off the back of that, I managed to go back and distill it into kind of 5 themes. And then we started to create a kind of movement piece, really. And then the music happened after that, and then the movement happened after that. And it went backwards and forwards many times until it kind of found its first place. But I was very aware from doing the research at the start that there was a lot of material to work with. Really, you're working with death and loss, compensation, legacy is a big one. So that was the part of it which I'd not quite conceived of at the start of it, but the part of it that kind of came through, and the part of it which I felt most emotionally plugged into was that I started to engage in my mind with my father, really, and engage with his story and think about his life and how his life was affected by this because of his relationship with his father, who was orphaned at the age of 4. And that was a kind of unknown story that kind of just got more and more momentum as I kind of started to work on it and started to feel that I was exploring a big part of my own personal life as well in a way that I'd not conceived, really. But it's a bit like the who do you think you are, or whatever. It was kind of one of those situations where the more digging I did, the more I found out, and the more that emotionally affected me, and actually seemed to be not just the past, but also the present, because we are the embodiment of our relatives, aren't we? And all the things that they've been carrying with them.
Yeah.
We carry as well. We just don't know it sometimes.
It's passed down to us, but not like visibly often. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was exploring those kind of like long-term legacy things well, I'm still exploring them today. It's been a massive catalyst. Yeah, it's been a massive catalyst for thinking about, where I'm from, where I'm going, all these things. My father's life, my grandfather's life, So it was,
also, I mean, like you said, it's also really good to look at those things and see those things, because sometimes we don't always see our parents or our grandparents. We don't always know about their lives, what's affected them. And so to see, to sort of take them out of the parent thing and see them as individuals and what affects them and how then that sort of is passed down to you, I guess. I mean, how long did it take? How long were you researching it for?
I mean, it's quite a short process, to be honest. In the end, I got the funding, I think, possibly in the April, and I did maybe a month, 6 weeks of kind of research. The research was going on all the way through because I was always tweaking it, but the initial kind of research was over about 6 weeks or so, and then met up with Gwen, who I mentioned, and we started to unpick it and develop it a little bit and see where we could kind of take it. Yeah, I mean, the whole history centre were great. They were very supportive. They gave me access to archive records. I got to see my great grandfather's orphanage records. I got to see his kind of results and stuff like that, notes. I found newspaper articles and magazines from the Seamen's Mission that had supported putting them in the orphanage at the time. So it was really kind of great. I found out that my granddad, my granddad was an engineer, like which is what I became, and I didn't even know that. But I found out subsequently that he was very good at maths, which I am as well, even though I can't stand it. I'm actually quite good at it, you know. So I think I get that.
Be passed down as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known this stuff unless I'd have found these records.
What do those connections now mean to you?
I think there's a hell of a lot of trauma that is that is every family will have something that's suppressed, really. I mean, that's the nature of us, the way we live our lives. I do think, you know, my granddad was 45 when he had my dad, and my dad was the youngest, 13. And, you know, I had a great childhood. I enjoyed my childhood immensely. But, you know, I think it was difficult for my dad, and my parents split up when, you know, when I was younger and stuff. And, you know, I wonder about that traumatic experience that my grandfather had at the age of 4, losing his dad, and how that affected his relationship with his son, my dad, and how that affected maybe our relationship as well, you know. And you know, I'm still kind of working through that. I mean, I became very, very emotive at various points as we were kind of working through this. And I did some radio interviews on Radio Humberside before we did the performances. And one of my relatives heard me on the radio. One of the paternal family relatives. I've got no connection with the paternal family anymore. She heard me on the radio and came down, and I saw her moments before I went on stage at the second night. It was 2 nights, the performance that we gave, and it just blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. So, you know, that was the first time I'd been plugged back into my dad's world in 17 years he'd been dead at that moment in time. And so yeah, stuff around that has been really quite tremendous and very therapeutic, and again, in a way I'd not really thought about. But this is the beauty of the arts, isn't it? You know, you can find yourself looking at things in a different way, and looking at strange subjects you never thought about, and find that you're emotionally attached to it in ways you could never have conceived of. And that's the beauty of being creative, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess also, like I said, therapeutic, but for people who come across, whether it's a memorial, whether, like you said, statues or pieces of art, or like what you've done here, that connects to them as well, and that they get something, because I mean, it's very atmospheric. It's also very intense, and I would say it's quite an avant-garde piece. And you said it's scored for electronics, saxophone, violin, and spoken word. And the piece sees 3 musicians and 3 dancers shift through 5 movements of a cycle. Can you explain just a little bit more about how you structured it, and tell us about the 5 movements?
Yeah, I think as we were kind of putting it together, I had all these notes, pages and pages of notes and research and ideas, and you know, those kind of gradually distilled into kind of themes to do with, you know, the past, the incident, death, the outcome, and the legacy, and everything that I seemed to be writing seemed to fit within one of those kind of subject matters, really. So they became the 5 kind of movement pieces, really, the 5 sections. The first one is called 55 degrees north, 5 degrees east, which kind of sets the tempo, it sets the situation, it gives a kind of slow, kind of menacing shift as we walk into this situation. Something's kind of approaching. So that's an introduction to it all, really. The second piece, Shell, is about the incident, really. So it's kind of exploring that. That's probably the most dramatic in terms of noise and movement.
Yeah.
The third piece is called Crane. So it's dealing with the kind of death and the sinking of the boat and stuff like that. The fourth piece is called Compass, and that's trying to look at the aftermath and look at the kind of moral position and the kind of, you know, the outcomes that come off this stuff. And then the final piece was called Statue, which is kind of exploring the kind of legacy, again, bringing in the modern day, bringing in me, and, moments where I kind of reflect on my own life very, very briefly and in an abstract way. And the whole visual dynamic of it as well, the movement artists, the whole that whole aspect of it, what people will see in a few minutes when we kind of show the film. But the three dancers are kind of all tethered around a central kind of sculpture in the middle, and it's supposed to kind of reflect the kind of interdependency and interlockingness of all of our lives, as in the same way that the Russian Navy and those young men that were all killed in the battle with Japan, and the trawlermen that were killed, they were inexplicably tied in together, and they were suffering from the same exploitation which kind of political systems do of certain individuals in society. So I was trying to explore the link between trying to explore the link between the men together and the boats together. So this is what this tethering is all about, exploring how the generations are tethered to each other, even though they don't want to be. Sometimes they want to kind of cut and they want to move away. They're not, they're tethered together, and even when they can't see it, it's there in some instinctive kind of reaction. So that's the kind of thing that we're exploring really with the movement artists, and they at various points are taking on lots of different identities. They're not it's three women, but they're not the wives of the trawlermen. They are reflecting everything that's kind of going on, really. They are, they're the Navy, they are the trawlermen, they are the boat, they are the weapons, they are money, they are legacy, they are unknown history. And that's what we're exploring. And the people that are involved in this absolutely gave their all emotionally to kind of engage with this, and it was such a fabulous thing to do.
Yeah, we'll actually have to get you to name them before we see it. But you performed this outdoors in Hull Harbour on a very windy evening, I believe. Looks it, but it looks like that would have been incredible to have watched that on that evening. How was that like? I mean, just in terms of technical stuff, but what was, and for you, and then what was the reception like that you got?
So arriving on site on the first day, we've been told that Storm Brian was hitting the UK.
Storm
Massively
Brian?
kind of inoffensive name, but a 40 odd mile per hour wind that was blowing straight off the Humber, straight across the stage.
Wow.
So to arrive on the site, to have rigged up, I mean, you'll see this on the film, but we're looking at the dancers, but at the side of the stage is the band, because we're playing live at the side of the stage.
Yeah.
The wind and the rain was blowing straight in at us. So the dance looks fabulous because the coats are blowing around, and that makes the whole experience great. For the musicians, it was quite stressful, really.
Yeah.
And as for the person who was responsible for everything, it was also quite stressful and performing. But it definitely brought some kind of feeling that we were like wrestling with the past and wrestling with, because the stage is actually, it's a wooden floored stage, and below it is the River Hull.
Wow.
And the actual rain, the river was lapping below it and kind of coming through the floor, and we really felt we were kind of summoning something, some kind of energy, and it was quite remarkable. The second night, as if we'd kind of made peace in some kind of Spielberg film or something, was completely tranquil, and everything was great, and everything was no wind, everything was kind of unstressful. And the audio that's on the recording, and the audio which is the LP, I'll mention the LP in a minute. On the second night, because there was just too much noise on the first night, really.
It looks great though. The recording is from the first night though, right?
Well, it's from both actually. So what you'll see is the still static camera that's at the front, that's the first night, because you'll see it get more and more wet, and then the kind of close-ups are actually from the second night.
Okay. So who collaborated with you on this? Can you name the dancers for us and the musicians?
Yeah, so the dancers are Gwen Osmond, Bethany Johnson, Leonie Fox, And the musicians are myself. I was doing some electronic stuff and spoken word stuff. We had a Gap Max on violin and Carl De Silva on saxophone and other electronics as well. And we also had a broader team as well that were helping us on the evening that were absolutely great. Andy Blundell, who did the sound, Isadora Dark, who helps with the kind of costumes, and Jamie Robinson, who helps film it. Probably some other people I've forgotten about as well, but they were the people who, it wouldn't have worked without any of them. I do remember getting on the site and actually nearly having a heart attack at the stressfulness of it all.
If people want to buy the album or to contact you, what do they need to do? Where can they get it?
Yeah, so basically the second night of this event was made into a record, made into an LP. We recorded the audio live, and that's now been released on a label called Outer Reaches, which is based in London. You can order the record through Bandcamp, Outer Reaches Bandcamp. So the address is just outerreaches.bandcamp.com. You can buy a download of that or an LP. That's what the LP looks like.
Okay. Yeah, lovely.
Still from it.
Great that it's an LP. Fab.
Yeah, there's an insert in it which has got some kind of poetic reflections and photographs and stuff like that. And there's a download available there as well. If you want to follow Vanishing, what we're doing, we're on Twitter, on Instagram. It's Vanishing UK. That's the Instagram handle and the Twitter handle. On Facebook as well. I think it's Vanishing UK on Facebook as well.
Gareth, how long have you been a musician? Because you mentioned you were an engineer, but how long have you been a musician, and have you ever done anything like this before?
I've probably been making music for about 20 years or so,
right.
in one fashion or another.
Right.
Mostly singing in punk bands for quite a while. It's only in the last few years that I've probably, when I realised I couldn't sing anymore, that I started to make more spoken word stuff. And actually, I much prefer this model of kind of working, really. Right. Have we ever done anything like this before? No, never before. Never anything that was exploring a piece of work, a piece of history, and it was a piece of work directly about that. And certainly nothing on a production capacity that was like this, really. I was massively out of my comfort zone, as was everybody else. But, you know, it was much more rewarding experience for that, definitely.
Thank you for speaking to us this evening, and good luck with all your ventures. This is quite a really interesting piece. I've enjoyed it. I hope people enjoy it. And now to our screening. Would you like to introduce it, Gareth?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so this is 55 degrees north, 5 degrees east, as performed by Vanishing.
Okay, enjoy. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you.
from a king, a flurry from a queen. How much for a man's dreams? In the hole, shells fire in silence and limbs left at sea. Timbers wrestle through the body, the change to be endured. The desire to survive, to cook and to eat, to treat that which needs treating, to bury that which needs burying, to walk you through change, beyond the day, beyond the deep, beyond the horizon, beyond the sea. Compass turns, moves through beauty and the light of the moon. Hundreds of miles of water, thousands arrive on shore. One for the man who lived alone, two for the fish they couldn't sell. 5 for the man who fed 6, 6 and more to the yard that brought the boats. One for the man who lived alone, 2 for the fish they couldn't sell. 5 for the men who fed 6, 6 and more to the yard that brought the boats. How much for a man's sight, for his arms? How much for his brain, for his heart? How much for his dreams, for his memories? How moves the compass, lying through the poles of grief? ranged through beauty and the light of the moon, over a body all broken and cold, but safe at last. Over his chest, the arrow swings. Over his chest, the arrow swings to the south and his guts, to the east and to the west, his limbs, and to the true north. Of his head, his heart. stretch.